Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right. Well, I'm excited today to have Lark on the show. She is from Utah, and she is a mother of a son who committed suicide 19 months ago. And she's going to share her story and the miracles that she has experienced through this journey. So, Lark, I'm grateful you're on the show, and thank you. And tell us what happened and tell us your story.
Hi, Liza. Thank you so much. And that seems kind of odd to hear you say, he died by suicide 19 months ago, and yet there have been so many miracles. And already just in talking with you earlier, I just feel so tender about it. And I don't always cry when I talk about this, but apparently today I'm going to be crying. And that's part of the healing. You never know what's going to show up for you, and you just have to allow however it is for the day. 19 months ago, my 19-year-old son took his life. And there are so many things that you think about when you hear somebody who died by suicide. Oh, they must have been in a dark place. They must have been isolating themselves, and they must not have been interacting with other people, or they must have been all this violence and all this stuff. And that wasn't our son at all. He was a freshman at the University of Utah in the mechanical engineering department, something he had wanted since he was 6 years old. I mean, the boy was brilliant. He had friends, he had hobbies, he had something to look forward to. He was going out on a hunting trip with his father the next week, and just all of these things that he had to live for. And yet there was an accumulation of three things that sort of happened all at once. And as a 19-year-old, sometimes you don't see past today. As an adult, we can see past and say, or, as someone who doesn't struggle with mental health issues, we can see past the issue at hand and say it will get better. But sometimes when you're in a dark place, you don't think that it will get better. And that's the hard part. And in retrospect, the regret that I have as a parent is that I didn't realize that he was struggling. And I didn't realize that he was in such a dark place and struggling. And that's the regret as a parent.
Yeah. And what advice, and maybe you'll go into this, but what advice would you give parents? Because I know you're an advocate for this now, and you'll share some of that. But are there keys that you could share, or should we wait to the end?
Well, we can sort of talk about that. I have learned through this experience, I have changed the way I parent, which is saying a lot, because I'm a very type A, need to be in control personality. And that has a lot to do with the way I was raised by an undiagnosed bipolar father, having no control in my life, moving to a different school every year of my life, all around the United States, no control. And so how I dealt with that is by trying to set boundaries and create some control. And if you have different children in your home, you know that they don't want to be controlled. They don't. And so I had to learn over time to allow him his space, allow him things that he didn't want to be controlled in, which, didn't always work for me because I need things very tidy and very clean. That's how I cope. And so it was a learning process of learning to loosen up some of my need for all this control. But as I have learned going through this situation, I would tell parents, just love your children. We think that we have to be their savior, that if they do something wrong, it's a terrible reflection on us. We feel like we're judged so much by what our children do, and we need to let all of that go and just be their guide and love them. And that's what I would say. That is a hard message for parents, especially like me, but that's my message.
Yeah, I agree. And it's powerful. I love that message.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love that you're so emotional. I get that when things hit you.
Most of the time when I'm talking about this, I do it, with a smile on my face, because I feel my son so close when I share this story, which is why I enjoy it so much. And so some people probably think, oh, why isn't she crying? And then some people are thinking today, oh, why is she crying? But like I said, that's something that I've had to deal with in the grief, and just know that some days it's going to be a certain way. And that's part of grieving, is you never know what is going to show up, and you just accept it and say, well, that's what we're having today. So,
which is powerful for you to say that too, and accept it. Like, this is how it goes.
It is
very real.
I would say when my son died, the first thing I thought about was just crawling into a hole, never coming out, and not talking to anyone. If you had told me 19 months ago that I would be standing up talking to thousands of people on my little soapbox about suicide prevention, suicide awareness, mental illness, I would have said, oh no, not this girl. That will never happen. Because what had happened 5 years prior to my son's death was my father, who struggled with mental illness his whole life, with bipolarity. He died by suicide. And I could not talk about it. Most of my friends, good friends, didn't even know how he died because of the shame and the stigma. And when my son died by suicide, I felt all of those feelings come up again, and I wanted to hide. I just wanted to disappear. And within just a couple days of his passing, some close friends of mine reached out to me, and they told me about the struggles their teenagers were having. These were teenagers that knew my son. And if you're familiar with the whole copycat suicide, especially amongst teenagers, this suddenly became a bigger issue than, was I a terrible parent? Why didn't I see? What was my problem? This became bigger than my son. What was he struggling with? Why did he make this choice? Suddenly, this became about saving these children, because I can't control what they choose to do. And I can't control the past. I can't change the past. Here comes that word control again. I can only control myself, and I can only choose what I do. And my thought is if I do not speak up and talk about this, and these children choose to take their lives, how can I live with myself? And within less than a week of my son's passing, I started posting about it on Facebook. I started talking about it. I started reaching out to other people. And it got to the point where my family was like, Mom, can you stop talking about this? And I said, I can't stop. I feel compelled. It was overwhelming. I felt like God had given me a mission. It wasn't a pretty mission. It wasn't something I would have wanted, but it was now my mission. Because what I didn't understand at the time was that suicide is the #1 killer of youth in Utah. It's the 10th largest killer nationwide of youth. Kids as young as 9 are taking their lives. You know, we tend to parent the way we were parented. We cannot parent our children the same way that we were parented. Life has changed. There are so many new dynamics going on in our society that we have got to allow for these changes and know that we are not being weak parents. If we allow for this, we are just trying to help our children cope and navigate through their society.
Yeah, which is challenging. Like you said, we typically parent the way we were parented, and the world is not the same. And the influences that our children have pressing on them are not the same.
Well, especially now, you know, with this COVID this year, I just feel like there is even more reason to be attentive to your children's mental wellness and the situations that they are going through. It is just exacerbated tenfold.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first spiritual sort of calling you felt was, I've got to speak out about this.
Exactly. You know, the night my son died, we had one of our church leaders came over, and he gave us a blessing of comfort to my husband first. And this man has known my family, my son, for all his life, his 19 years. So we've been very close. And he gave my husband a blessing of comfort, and he started to do the same for me, this blessing of comfort. And he stopped halfway through and he said, Lark, you have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. And this was before I really felt that urge to talk about it. And this was the night my son died. And I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about work to do, because, work, I'm thinking I own businesses, and I'm thinking work like business. And I'm thinking that is so inappropriate. Here my son died. Yeah. And you're telling me to work? And within less than a week, I just mulled that over. What is the work? What is the work? And I finally realized the work is sharing this message that you matter, that you need to stay on this planet, that God has a reason for you to be here, and that you have a specific mission that will bless other people's lives. And if you choose to take your life, you're not going to be here when someone else is looking for what you have that's going to help them.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was
Truly.
amazing.
To have that blessing, that insight, and you obviously do have a work to do.
I do,
Yeah.
and it's huge because as I would talk about it, then I create this safe space where people that can then come to me and they can feel open and know that they can share and I won't judge them. And what's been very interesting and eye-opening is that I have had people come to me and tell me that they attempted 20 years ago. And I look at them and I think, no, I would never have thought that about you. Or I had a friend, a former coworker, who reached out and said, 6 months earlier, the reason I was in the hospital was I attempted. And I'm like, what? Or people that will tell me, I've been thinking about this and I struggle with, suicide ideation. And we just need to make it a safe place where people can say, I am struggling, and allow for that. And instead of hiding and not being willing to, because sometimes we don't know what to do. Or what do you do if somebody says, I thinking of taking my life? Tell them that you love them, that you want them to get help, and help them find that help.
Absolutely. Do you think that that's maybe one of your bigger messages, that support network,
Yes.
that connection with people, which I think is becoming harder with COVID? I teach at a university and I'm seeing my freshmen specifically struggling so much. It's their first experience on campus. We don't have connection. Like, this
It
is
is.
risky.
It is very risky. I would remember my father would come for meals, Christmas and Thanksgiving, and he would very much want to be with the rest of the family. And yet, because of his mental illness, he would isolate himself. So he'd literally grab a plate of food and leave the room and go into a different place in the house because he just couldn't do it. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that people who struggle with mental illness, they do exactly the opposite of what they need, and they isolate versus spending time together. And so as families and with loved ones and our friends, we need to reach out. And even if it's a text or a phone call that says, you matter, I'm thinking about you, I have learned that connection, human connection and relationships, that they are everything. That's all there is.
I agree. Absolutely.
What was interesting, you hear these things that time heals all wounds. And I was pretty active right from the beginning, trying to make changes. What am I got to do? I go out and talk to different groups and do podcasts and realize that, oh, yes, I do need to write a book and all of these things. But as time passed, and right about the 4th month, things got harder. And my husband and I were talking about it, and we both said, we don't want to go out. We would do our work and come home, and we just would cocoon and be at home. And we almost had our COVID type experience last year, and of just not wanting to be around anybody else. And friends were so kind, and they would try to get us to come out or do things or go to a play, and we just did not have the emotional capacity to do that. And that's the one thing, is like, yes, feel free to invite people that are grieving, but understand that they might not be able to do that. Just be there and meet them where they are. And then as time went on and it got closer to the 6-month mark, it actually got really hard for me, to the point where I just felt this crushing weight on my chest. And I was down at a women's retreat in southern Utah that weekend that my son's 6-month mark was. And I was walking alone out in the Red Rocks, and I'm having a conversation with God and with my son. And I said, I understand that you want me to share this message. I am willing to do this, but you have got to take away this like crushing pressure on my chest that I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't function. I couldn't talk. I can't do what you want me to do if I'm walking around in this depression all this time. It was a huge miracle. It was a blessing. And just within seconds, all of that pressure, all of that depression left, and it hasn't come back. And I feel like I've been given the gift. My superpower is that I can go into the dark space and I can talk about dark topics that people don't want to talk about, but they need to be addressed. And the reason they need to be addressed is that based on the numbers of suicide that are affecting our nation, and the fact that they are increased by 30% since COVID started, statistically speaking, you are going to have suicide impact you at a very close level. And that is why we need to talk about it. When I started talking about this, my goal was, if there is one parent that doesn't have to go through what my husband and I have been through, I will have changed the world. Because as a parent, I can tell you, you have no idea. To lose a child is hard. To lose someone by suicide when it could have been prevented, it's unimaginable.
Yeah. What a beautiful gift to receive that weight lifted. Because yes, I agree with you. How can we perform our missions and do our work if we are burdened and too heavy laden? So that is miraculous and beautiful.
It was. And I truly feel like that allowed me to continue on.
And maybe, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about your son or your book. I know you've been working on a book. So maybe share a little bit about that.
I love sharing my son's story. When I do that, I feel so close to him. And I think the message I want to tell parents is that my son and my relationship, we were not this rosy, happy parenting situation. This was a boy that pushed my button every day of his life. And it took me a week before I cried when he passed away. I was so angry with him. And it wasn't until I saw this little boy's picture when he was 6 that I just broke down and sobbed for that little boy, for the relationship that we had struggled with his whole life. And as I have shared his story, I just feel him so close. And I feel like he wants me to share this story, that he got lost. He had negative thoughts that allowed him to just go into a dark place and think that taking his life was the answer. And it's not. And so I feel closer to him now than I've ever felt before. And something that's very interesting about this boy, his name was Christian. And when he was 15, almost 16, he let me know that he did not believe in God. He believed in science. And I said, well, son, okay, you run with that. I think God is science, but if that's what you want to believe, that's your prerogative. And I began to realize that I needed to parent this child in a different way, that as a Christian, I needed to maybe interact with him in a way that was less judgmental and more from a standpoint of love. As a parent, we never like to think that we're wrong. And one day, as I was walking down the hall and I was thinking of my favorite topic at the time, which was, this child is driving me crazy. I know no parent has ever thought that.
I know,
before.
I've got 4 children and I totally know what you mean.
I suddenly had this vision kind of open up before my eyes, and it was a picture of my son and me before we came to earth. And he said to me, Mom, you're going to have trouble being Christ-like, but I am going to help you. So here is a child named Christian who doesn't believe in God, who is going to help me become more Christ-like. And I will tell you, he has done his mission.
Wow.
Because my grief has completely changed the way I am at a cellular level. And I am a different person from who I was before he passed away.
That story is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful. I have some children like that have been difficult, and I felt similar. I'm here to teach you certain things that you will not learn otherwise. So that's powerful.
Yes. So then I'll share another miracle that has happened in this last 19 months is, I'm a doer, and I thought that I could write this book in 2 weeks and get it done. And that was over a year ago that I thought that. Those 2 weeks came and went, and I would write some things, but it was heavy. It was very heavy, and it was very emotional. And I would write some things, and then I would put it to the side. I'm like, I just can't go there right now. And finally, early in January this year, I'm like, okay, I have got to do this. And so I dedicated myself for the first 6 weeks of 2020. And I would write from 6 in the morning until 9 in the morning. And that's the first thing I would do in the morning after I got up. I would just write, because you know how it is. When you get up, I'll start some laundry, or I'll work out, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And then it's 12 o'clock and you're like, where's my time? I literally dedicated that time. And I didn't write every day, and I didn't write every day for those 3 hours solid, but I did do it for the most part. And I was able to get a big chunk of it done. And then as I was praying at the end of January, I was in one of Richard Paul Evans' groups that he has. And in case you don't know, in case you're the one of the 5 people in the world that don't know this, he is a #1 New York Times bestselling author 40 times. He wrote The Christmas Box House about 22 years ago, and it has to do with losing a child and grief. And that book came to him as a spiritual download. And I'm thinking, okay, who can help me get this book out? How do I even do this? I don't have a publisher. I don't have, anybody guiding me except God. And I thought, oh, I need to come into his sphere of influence. And so I was saying that on a Wednesday night, the last Wednesday in January of this year. The next morning in this group, Facebook group that he's in, he posts, I'm doing this women's seminar on Saturday. I only have 20 spots, first 20 ladies, I'm happy to have you there. And I'm thinking to myself, that is 2 days away. I am busy. I have obligations. I can't possibly go. So that night, I'm saying my prayers, and God said, I answered your prayer, and you told me no. And I said, message received, I'll clear my schedule. Well, unbeknownst to me, Richard was having a conversation with his assistant asking, did Lark sign up? Because he knows me a little bit. I know his wife, and he's had one conversation with me. But he just said, I feel like she needs to be there. I don't know why. And he goes, find her number. I need to connect with her. But I reached out to his assistant beforehand and I said, is there a spot? And she said, yes, Rick has been saving a spot for you.
Wow.
And so that was at the end of January. And since then, he has agreed to write the foreword for my book, which is amazing because he's
huge.
In the middle of not only launching a book this month, but he is also writing another book that's due at the end of the year. So he's got a full plate, and he's running the Christmas Box House, which is a foundation for abandoned and abused children. And he deals with a lot of people's grief, and he understands, and I knew he would. So that is another miracle because he has such a big reach. And if this message can go out and reach tens of thousands of people, of parents who maybe are struggling in their relationship with their child. How can I change this? How can I make it better? Or maybe have lost a child and they don't know how to get past that grief. That's a message I want to give because my husband really struggled after my son died, and he went to a therapist. The therapist gave him this book. And at the end of reading this book, my husband said, that's the stupidest book I've ever read. And I'm thinking to myself, how can it be so stupid? So I skimmed through it and I finished and I'm like, you're right. That was a stupid book. It was just a bunch of stories that a pastor had put together about people who died in the hospital. But he gave no hope. There was nothing to move past this death. And I said, my book is going to have hope. There is going to be a message of peace and hope. And that's what I hope to convey in my book, is that there is still meaning in life. And it's a matter of finding something greater than yourself that allows you to go on. And sharing my son's message is that meaning for me.
Yeah, that's powerful. Tell us the name of your book and when it's coming out, all those details.
Sure. It's coming out November 10th, 2020. You'll be able to find it on Amazon. The name of the book is Learning to Breathe Again. And that's just due to the fact that everything is hard when you lose someone. Even breathing, it was so heavy and hard. And just, you have to learn how to do everything all over again. And what's your new normal? What can you do? And this book, I had an editor who really made me dig deep. She said, you're glossing over things. You need to really expound on these certain things. So I had to, add some additional material to the book, and I'm bawling as I'm doing this. And I'm thinking, well, my heart is in this book and it is raw, and I am not trying to sugarcoat anything. I am saying this is what was real, and this is what I wish I could change and go back and do differently. And this is what I'm doing differently as a parent moving forward.
Was it a healing process for you to write this book? Do you feel
it was, but it was not easy.
No.
And I had a girlfriend from high school who was kind of helping me. She's written a couple of books and she was guiding me a bit. And she said, Lark, you're going to put in your childhood, aren't you? And about your father. And I'm like, well, why would I do that? She goes, because that is huge. That plays a big part in it. And that was hard. And I didn't realize how integral my childhood was and the things that happened in my childhood, how that spilled over and played into my relationship with my son, into how I parent, into how I react to things. Because I was teaching a class when the policeman came to tell me about my son. And I did not react. I had a hard time emotionally connecting. I didn't believe it. I just was blank. I didn't do anything. And the poor policeman thought I was in shock when I wasn't able to connect emotionally. And that has to do with the way I was raised. I just didn't have the capacity, the knowledge of how to connect emotionally. And so it's been learning a lot about myself from looking at the childhood experiences.
I'm a big believer in that, but that's because I teach child development. And we explore all those childhood things.
Yes.
They completely influence everything we do as adults and how we interact, which is another beautiful connection I'm seeing, that vision in before you came to earth. Like, I'm going to teach you to be more Christ-like. And when you look at Jesus, very emotionally connected, right? Like, here's a being that's pure love. And that's part of your journey, it sounds like.
It is. It is.
Wow.
So it's just, I look at all of this and say, could it have been different? Yes. But maybe this was the way it needed to be.
Yeah. And I think we have to accept that and learn to accept that, because you can't change it.
You know what? And that's what I've learned, because when I start to think, what if it were different? What if he hadn't? That's when the negative thoughts come in. And that's when I start to spiral into the dark hole. And I have to remember, and it takes a real effort on my part to say, no, I cannot go back. That's crazy talk. You're being crazy now. When you say it could have been different. Well, no, it's not. This is reality. And so often as humans, we don't want to confront reality. We want to pretend that it's different or wish it could be different. And until we are able to accept what is real, we cannot move on. I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm just saying that that's how it has to be.
Yeah, I totally agree, and have had experiences that have taught me that as well. Well, Lark, this is amazing. Your work, it sounds like a calling for you through a lot of different experiences in your life. And I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and that you're willing to share this story and the miracles that you've seen.
Thank you. And I just appreciate people allowing me to be on their podcast to share this story, because it's a spiritual experience. Every time I do share this story about my son and the struggles that we've both been through, and how through sharing this story that everyone has value and everyone is needed. Everyone, this connection that we have with every person on the planet. One person can change your whole life. And that's the message that I appreciate sharing. So thank you, Liza. I really appreciate it.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you. Tell us your website and some more information that we need.
So my website, if you want to learn about, right now before the link goes up on Amazon, it's larkdeangalley.com. So Lark, L-A-R-K, Dean, D-E-A-N, Galley, Galley.com. You can find links to learning more, getting notifications about the book, but it will also be on Amazon, and it's Learning to Breathe Again on Amazon. So.
Thank you so much. Beautiful message, beautiful stories. Anything else you want to share before we end?
I just want to tell everyone that you matter, and that you need to stay in the game, because God needs you, and you are going to be a key point for someone down the road. And as a parent, sometimes we wonder, maybe my family would be better off without me. And that is absolutely not true. And as kids who maybe struggle, make sure you as a parent tell them that you love them, that you need them, that they are not a burden. Kids need to know that they have a place.
Thank you. Powerful messages. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much